So I'm now recording. I've worked out you can only record on this thing if I'm on Chrome.
Okay.
But anyway, I'm on Chrome. So I just wanted to ask you, have you had a haircut?
No, should I be doing my hair? I'm just wondering if are you recording on video or audio?
Video.
Oh, right, yeah, that's fine.
But have you cut your hair? It looks like you cut your hair.
No. I had my hair cut before. It's probably just getting greasier. No, I washed it this morning. So
it's different from yesterday. That's what I was thinking. Anyway, so good to see you. And I just wanted a really quick chat about commonplace books because most people haven't got the faintest idea what they are.
Okay.
So could you just say who you are and why I know about commonplace books? Because
my name is Brian Jenner, and I'm a speechwriter, and I've worked for 20 years writing speeches for other people. And part of becoming a professional is realizing what the rhetoricians taught us, that the best way to be eloquent is to take examples of other people's eloquence and copy them. So many people have heard of Bob Monkhouse, and he built a whole comedy career around lots of books of jokes that he could recycle or identify when he was going to a particular gig. And the idea is it's a bit like a dictionary. You have subject matter like the economy or death or grief or joy or jokes for starting a speech, jokes for finishing a speech. And you have I have a Word document which I use, and I put titles, and then over the years I've copied and pasted snippets I've heard on the radio, newspaper cuttings, speeches, live speeches, sermons that I've heard, and I go away and write them down, and then I put them in my commonplace book, and then I use it as a dictionary. I have a sort of A to Z. So if I'm looking for some joke about Washington, somebody's going to Washington to give a speech, I'll look at Washington, and I may have something about, I think there's a joke about wedding cake buildings or something like that, but it's pre-prepared, oven ready.
Right.
And and often after you've been doing this job for a while, you'll talk to somebody for half an hour in preparation for their speech, and then suddenly a quotation from your commonplace book will come to mind, and you basically done half the work of the speech, because that person would have spent a lot of time looking for it, may never have found that particularly good quote or story or joke. And so it's about being rigorous and professional about my work.
What first occurred to me was that you could look everything up any time, so why bother collecting it?
Well, I think that it's the personalized element that well, one thing, if you hear a joke delivered live, like one example, I heard a joke delivered in a sermon and the whole church laughed. So that is auricular proof that it works if it's told properly. If you see a joke on the page, often it can look a bit flat. But something that looks a bit flat on the page isn't necessarily flat when it's delivered as a live line. So there is a bit of, just because, some of inexperienced people writing speeches will write stuff down and it makes them laugh. And they think, well, if it makes me laugh, it'll make everybody else laugh. And they get a big shock when they kind of deliver it, because obviously there's rhetorical elements to making people laugh. So, and I think the classic best man mistake is to use a bit of obscenity or inappropriate joke and think that that's going to go down well. You know what I mean? Just because, well, it's funny to me and my mates, So it's a case of also, as a writer, I want my own voice and my own style, and so I will collect what I like, and therefore it becomes a self-refreshing, self-fulfilling, self-regenerating thing, isn't it, really? And that okay, there are many other jokes that other people would use, but it's very much my way of operating.
there are two things that jump into my head there. One is if you're writing down other people's stuff, how can it be yours? And then the other one is if you're writing speeches for someone else, they don't want yours.
Well, they want something that's appropriate, I think, and the point is that when you read Matthew Paris, people pay good money to hear Matthew Paris, don't they? Matthew Paris is clearly a commonplacer because this book Scorn has loads of good one-liners for speeches, and you don't put something like this together unless you're quite systematic and meticulous in collecting your good stuff. So yeah, thing is that people can reject it, but I've chosen something because it's touched me at a deeper level.
Right.
I was looking at Renaissance commonplacing, and the point is that as you read, you're thinking, is this worth recording? And that makes you a more attentive reader.
Right.
And presumably, if something has hit a nerve, or is a particularly good definition of something, or a particularly a chiasmus or something like that, a kind of witty little structured phrase that can work best, surely you'd like that rather than the first joke that comes up on the internet when you search for 60th birthday jokes.
Right. Yeah. So what was the last thing you put in your commonplace book?
Well, I'm actually what was the last thing? Well, actually, I'm developing a second form of commonplace book at the moment, in the sense that using mobile phones, my camera on my mobile phone, I'm planning to, I'd like to sort of create some kind of institution that trains people, or club or society, to rediscover rhetoric, because the more in my reading, I'm discovering that rhetoric is sort of shunned by academics, and there's a sort of political campaign to train young politicians. There's a intellectual campaign to make it more prominent within academia, and rediscover rhetoric when you're studying Shakespeare. There's modern languages development, because I think if you can use rhetorical techniques when you, as a non-native speaker, listen to another speaker speaking, if they, I had this experience in Germany. If somebody speaks German and they use three-part lists, rhetorical questions, and contrasts, it's easier for me to understand than if somebody writes formless prose. You see, so and the sad fact is that rhetoric has been forgotten. So I'm trying to marshal and collect all my thoughts about rhetoric. So I'm basically going through all my leading thinkers about rhetoric, Sir Brian Vickers, and who's the other one? Hobbes fella, Quentin Skinner, and these kind of top people who've written about rhetoric and how it influences Shakespeare and Aristotle, and how they wrote about it. And I copy out the best passages, and I photograph them, and I cut them out. And I really do think that this is a good way, one, to enrich my creativity, and two, to pick out the absolutely key ideas that I see myself as a translator. Academics write in a one way. I write in a populist way. I'm wanting to be understood. I'm not wishing to impress other academics. I just want to make it, as Tyndale said, so the ploughboy can understand it, so everybody, because I think rhetoric is something that everybody can use for their own practical purposes. If it's writing a letter to Sun Alliance to ask for your money back or something like that, rhetoric is as useful there as it is for Boris Johnson explaining the coronavirus.
Yeah. In what ways are you and are you not the modern Erasmus?
Oh, well, that's a nice thing, because Erasmus is definitely somebody who I'm a big fan of, and he collected maxims. I suppose a bit of a moralist in terms of I like collecting proverbs and aphorisms and maxims, which was one of Erasmus's big activities. And the other thing about Erasmus was he created a school textbook called De Copia, and it had lots of exercises to increase your word power. In the old, what was the name of that magazine that used to exist? I can't remember. Called Increase Your Word Power was one of their columns. Literary Digest, no, Reader's Digest. That's it,
Yeah.
Reader's Digest. So yeah, he had exercises like find 128 ways of writing "I was delighted to receive your letter." So that would be, if you were in a grammar school in 1490, you'd spend your day, how can I say I was delighted to receive your letter in 148 different ways or whatever. And they did letter writing, and they did speech making, and they used their knowledge of rhetoric to, Erasmus's point is that the more you understand rhetoric, the more you can see how other people, great writers, use it.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're quite right. I do covet that role of being a 21st century Erasmus.
So then, before I let you go, who do you think are your main rivals? Possibly Matthew Paris, I don't know, but who are the other rivals for that title?
Well, Sam Leith has written several books about rhetoric and writing, and who else is there? There's that chap. What's his name? Mark Forsyth.
Oh yeah.
He's written a book on rhetoric, and they've done sort of Christmassy, gift books that you can write about. Sam Leith is a bit more highbrow. He's tried to popularize rhetoric, but I suppose I went to the same school as William Tyndale, so it's been with me a long time.
Yeah.
And I was inspired by those, Erasmus and the idea, the historical. I've created the European Speechwriter Network, which is a kind of new Renaissance. We'd have the best Dutch rhetoricians and the best German rhetoricians and the best French rhetoricians all coming to have dinner in Oxford and Cambridge colleges. So that's very much inspired by Renaissance humanism. And I think the other point about is rhetoric is about having seen two sides to every argument, and we have a problem in that dictatorship may be on the rise, that people are feeling happy to be told stay indoors and avoid this invisible virus, so yeah, I'm sure that there are other Sir Brian Vickers and Quentin Skinner are obviously doing it in the academic sphere, but I'm like I say, I'm doing all my planning to create this European School of Rhetoric, and I hope very much that when we emerge from this quarantine, it's a project I can pursue.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Brian.
When's your book coming out?